Oh, a little different setup this time. Waiting here for a second. Let me go. Hopefully everything is working correctly. I believe so. Hope everyone is doing well. Okay. There we go. All right. Trying to make sure everything is on go here. I have a brand new computer. It was quite a fiasco, to say the very least, with everything this past weekend. With yesterday especially, my battery went out on me on my old computer. I had to get a new computer, so now I got a new screen, trying to figure all this stuff out just before the show. I had to go today to get the computer, and so it was an absolute fiasco. So I have a new computer, trying to figure it all out. Finished putting together the rest of the pieces to the show for the slide and everything, and then trying to figure out how to share the screen right quick, and couldn't do that, but I uploaded the slide onto, I didn't know, but this program actually you can upload the slide, so it's kind of interesting. So it's been an interesting day. So I hope everyone's doing well, getting things going here. Camera is definitely a little clearer than the old computer that I had, so that's good stuff. Here's a little wild at this moment and running around like a madman, trying to get everything situated. So again, I hope everyone's doing well. Enjoying the cooler weather, that's for sure. And so today we're going to go into the Exodus. We went over Noah and the Great Flood and redating the flood last week, as well as some of the theological and philosophical significance of the stories of Abraham and Noah and the flood and tyranny and so on. So this week we're going to be exploring a lot of the evidence going from the time of Abraham to through the Exodus and the conquest of the nation of Israel into the land of Canaan. And we're going to be looking over quite a bit of stuff. I'm hoping I have all my thoughts gathered. Like I said, it's been a bit chaotic, but I think it'll be good nonetheless. So if you would please like and share and get the word out there. And so it should be pretty good. We'll begin with a word of prayer. And dear Lord God, Jesus Christ, thank you for this time together. Please bless this study, Lord. Fill us with Holy Spirit, cleanse from our sins, and help us come to know you, know your word better, and strengthen our faith. And help us to go out and be a light to the lost world around us, to share this new information, and to help enlighten others, both within the church and outside the church. And Lord, continue to transform us and help us become more like you each and every day. Thank you for all things, a little more than anything. Great and wonderful name of prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, Father in heaven. Amen. Okay. So do it a little different here with the uploaded slides. Makes them a little smaller, just a little bit compared to the sharing the screen. But I think it works out fairly well. So I only have to use a laptop instead of two screens. It's kind of nice. All right. So we're going to be going over the Exodus, and we're going to be looking at redating the traditional dating format of when the Exodus actually took place by up near to 1,000 years earlier than traditional dating standards. So we looked last week at Noah and the Great Flood, the Tower of Babel, and redating it from the traditional dating of about 2400 BC to right around 10,000 BC. So several thousand years prior, and how there are more than likely gaps in that early genealogical record, stemming from the time of Abraham, from the time of Adam and Eve to especially into the time of Abraham. And I believe we'll be looking at an earlier dating with the time of Exodus, predicated upon a gap during the time of the judges. And the only real dating system that we have in the Bible is found in 2 Kings, I believe it's chapter 6, maybe verse 2, something akin to that. And it says that it's been about 480 years since the time that the children have left Egypt, were slaves, had left Egypt, and the time of the building of Solomon's temple. And so that's the only type of record we actually have in accordance to understanding the time frame of when the time of the Exodus to the time of Solomon, the building of Solomon's temple. So that puts it somewhere, that scholars put it anywhere from 1200 BC to about 1400 BC is when the Exodus occurred, according to traditional dating standards. But we're going to look how that may not necessarily be the case, that maybe copying of the manuscripts and that dating are actually incorrect. And what's fascinating about it, now, according to the work of Gerald, I'm trying to pronounce his name correctly, Ardsuma, he was an archaeologist, and he actually proposed that dating method of early dating to about 2450. I would say it's a little bit later than that, to about 2200 BC, the actual collapse, but that's essentially what he's going to base off of, the actual collapse, of the old kingdom of Egypt that we'll be going over here shortly. And there's various different means of, hey, actually, thank you for coming on. I had that on the wrong thing there, on the private chat. Okay, there we go. Thank you. I really do appreciate it. And so we'll be looking at will be some of what I've come up with is based off of his work. I discovered years ago, I believe it was about 2012 when I first discovered his work. And it really fascinated me to go, well, maybe that's the case. He believes there was a mistranslation, that it was actually 1,480 years rather than 480 years in the copying of the manuscripts down the line. I think really 480 years is more or less a generic number, because if you divide 12 by 480, you get 40 years, and those two, 12 and 40 are very significant numbers within the Bible, commonly used, and I think they're just round, wholesome numbers that are used. And but again, that's the only type of true time frame reference that we have, other than some of the generic years found within the book of Judges, which again are oftentimes 40. The children of Israel wandered around in the desert for 40 years. Whether or not it was actually 40, we don't really know. We know that the scripture does give us those numbers, but they're oftentimes very generic, generic significant type numbers, 40, 12, 7, 3, things of that nature. So we have to be careful with taking those as literal numbers. Again, just like I was saying in the idea of earlier lectures on the second one, where I was speaking of translating Genesis in a Genesis 1 and 2 in a literal format, especially with the day of the Hebrew word yom, translated as day. Many scholars are saying, well, that's a literal translation. It's literally day within Genesis 1. But then, as I said before, and we'll get in here today with this lecture, that's not always the case. It's oftentimes translated in many different ways, always, continuously, daily, things of that nature. And if you were to translate it as day all the time throughout Scripture, it would translate into weird, it would become weird translations, essentially. We'll see that here shortly. But one of the passages specifically that I looked at dealing with the idea of forever. And so it's very complex, as I said before, and it's not so straightforward. This right here is a carving of a bull, and it is actually found in Saudi Arabia. We'll be getting into that with the location of Mount Sinai, not being in the Sinai Peninsula, but being further out into Saudi Arabia, where many scholars believe that is the true land of Midian, where the Sinai mountain is supposed to be actually located. Very fascinating. We'll be going into that, and I'm sure you guys will enjoy that. So, okay, we've got a couple of quotes, as I always like to do. Though a necessary part of God's unfolding plan, the Sinai legislation wasn't God's final word. As the biblical scholar N.T. Wright affirms, the Torah, which is first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah is given for a specific period of time and is then set aside, not because it was a bad thing now happily abolished, but because it was a good thing whose purpose had now been accomplished. This is a message in the New Testament book of Hebrews. The old Mosaic law and the Old Testament institutions and figures like Moses and Joshua were prefiguring shadows that would give way to substance and completion. Paul Copan, he's the one that wrote Is God a Moral Monster? Fantastic work. I actually read it a couple of times, dealing with much of the Old Testament law on various different levels, as well as that of the conquest of Canaan, of the land of Canaan. It helps shed a lot of light on some of the difficult passages found within the Torah. So if you want to check that out, I have a link to that book in the description. And if you want to actually check out the interview between him and I I believe, when was that? About a little over a year and a half ago. It's on the channel as well. I meant to put it in the description and I completely forgot, but you can always go to my YouTube channel and you can see my interview with him on there. So great guy, great work that he had done, spent many years studying that, and he did a wonderful job. So this is Richard Dawkins. This is on the opposite end. I wanted to put this in there, an atheist. They call him one of the 4 horsemen of atheism. What is it? Neo-atheism, new atheist. So the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infantile, genocidal, philistile, pestilentile, and I'm pronouncing those incorrectly, of course, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, I'm saying these wrong, I know that, capriciously malevolent bully. So he uses all these large words and different things. Apparently, I'm not smart enough to pronounce. But anyways, he, amongst many, are essentially stating the same thing, that God is a horrible, in the Old Testament, Yahweh is a horrible God, and it's, to say otherwise is outright foolish. So, and this was actually in his book, The God Delusion. I mentioned it before. And he goes on to saying how evolution replaces God, and there's various other evidence he uses. And he's actually done a fantastic job at driving a lot of believers, even somewhat prominent believers, away from Christianity, unfortunately, through his work. And of course, as I always state, whenever you read someone's argument, even if it is the other side, which is not a bad thing, I enjoy actually reading atheistic arguments. That way I know where they're coming from and I can understand their arguments, and I can go back and see exactly how all that fits in. It just makes your argument stronger and makes your faith stronger at the end of the day. So, but again, a lot of them do interpret the Old Testament, and it's hard to interpret. It's hard to understand because it was made for, as Paul Copeland has stated, and N.T. Wright, is the fact that it was made for a specific time. And we can't even begin to fathom what that's like. Let's say, especially according to the dating that I'm proposing here today, sending back about 4,500 to 5,000 years ago. We can't even begin to understand, slightly comprehend the type of lifestyle those people were truly living back then. And not only the type of lifestyle, I mean, it's even more complex than that. But if you were born in that time and did not have the accessibility to the technology and understanding and literature and stuff that we have today, the scientific advancements, and so on, we do not understand how that mind actually operates. You have to really take yourself. Most people are like, well, I can take myself now and put myself back in that position and see it, but it's like wrong. You're looking at it still from a perspective of growing up with technology, growing up with the knowledge that you do, and putting yourself back in that time. It doesn't work that way. You actually have to somehow erase all of what you know now and literally grow yourself up in that environment and culture in order to, and with the limited knowledge that they had, in order to understand how the people functioned with the limited, slightly, maybe even slightly lower IQ. I don't know as far as that goes, evolutionarily speaking, perhaps. But then again, with the way things are looking nowadays, I would say they're probably higher IQ than we are. So anyway, traditional dating standards. I'll go ahead and blow this up. Well, they didn't really blow it up much, did it? Anyways, so the traditional dating, somewhere around 1400 to 1200 BC is where the traditional dating lies, depending on who you're talking to within the biblical scholar, realm as far as that goes. But that's where they place it. They put Abraham, as you can see, around 1900 BC. And the time of Joseph, let's see here, somewhere down, doesn't even specify on here, somewhere around 1700 BC was the time of Joseph. That's your traditional dating. But there's little to no evidence for, first off, a mass exodus. There was no wall at Jericho during the time of the traditional dating of the conquest. There's no evidence for Abraham or anything of that sort. As we saw last week that we're about to see now, we see evidence of Abraham. We see evidence of Sodom and Gomorrah being mentioned within what's called the Ebla tablets, which date to around 2500 BC or even earlier up to 2700 BC, and is recording those around those times. So much earlier than a traditional dating standard. And we'll see much more evidence that supports that early dating as well. Okay, so this is again into the unknown. Now the Lord had said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran. And they departed to go to the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, as far as the terebinth tree and Morah, and the Canaanites were then in the land. Genesis 12, 1-6. So we read that last time, but I just kind of want to go back over that right quick. And again, here's the Ebla tablets found in Ebla, right here in modern day Syria. Of course, I'm pointing at it like you would actually see it. Unfortunately, I'm so used to other screens, so bear with me on that. There's over 16,000 clay tablets and many other fragments, if I'm not mistaken. And it lists several different biblical cities, but it also lists the names of Abraham, Ishmael, as well as Eber, Israel, and Michael. And so these are references to, Israel would be a reference to Jacob. And you'd have, of course, Eber was supposedly the father of the Hebrews. And so, of course, you have Ishmael, which is Abraham's son through Hagar, the maid. And, but again, these tablets, if that's true, these names coincide, and they actually are referencing to these figures and referencing to the cities, that of Sodom and Gomorrah, one of them. And then the dating is much earlier than traditional dating. That puts Abraham and them back all the way up to around 3000 and 1900 BC to the true emergence of Sumerian civilization, because that's where Abraham actually comes out of. down by the Persian Gulf down there at the city of Ur. Ur was a major city in the civilization of Samaria, and they had all sorts of different temples that I was talking about last week with the worship of the Anunnaki. You had Anu, you had Enlil, Enki, several different entities that they worship. But I see a lot of comparison. We'll go into a little bit more here today with that of Anu and Yahweh. And Anu was actually called, the translation of his name in Samaria is Father in Heaven. Very interesting, the parallels of that and the time of Christ, the Father in Heaven. And Enlil himself has several characteristics of that of Christ. And so I think these entities, the deities, go back much further. The difference is that Samaria began to worship all these different gods that were more or less angelic beings. And I believe God called Abraham out of there to get away to establish a nation that did not worship all the various different entities that were a part of God's kingdom, but rather Him alone. And what's fascinating, Ebla is Abraham traveled straight through Ebla during his journey to the land of Canaan at that time. So it's fascinating how these tablets reference his name, reference Ishmael, and various other names during that time, but at a much earlier dating than traditional dating standards, which makes these stories much more significant at the end of the day. They're not as many atheistic proponents claim that these stories are derived from older stories, but rather these are authentic stories in and of themselves, not including the fact that the story of Exodus, as we'll see, is so unique. It has no other comparison in ancient literature whatsoever. There is no comparison to the story of Exodus. I've always been very fascinated by the story of Exodus with the pillar of cloud and things of that nature, and the burning bush. And there is literally no other ancient mythological story that has any slight comparison to that story in and of itself, especially that of a pillar of cloud. Very fascinating. And we'll go into more of that. So, the big thing with the show is to just be open-minded and to really look at the information being given, to take it in and see how it fits at the end of the day. And as I always state, I'm simply providing evidence, information for people to consider, for the church itself, as well as Christians, both Christians and non-Christians, to consider at the end of the day. This up on top there, by the way, is what's called a ziggurat. Most people believe that the Tower of Babel was supposed to be representative of that, but I believe the Tower of Babel will be much older, according to what we have on the evidence of both archaeologically speaking and geologically speaking, as we went over last week. So, but that's very interesting. Pyramidal structures that you do see, that in Samaria right there, what's called the ziggurat, and then you have the pyramids themselves in Egypt and scattered all over the world, even in China as well. Okay, and all right. So we got Joseph and Imhotep. But before we go into this, and it may be a little small here, I want to just kind of slightly go back into the idea of into the unknown, tapping into that. And I've spoke about it a little bit with that in regards to the ideas of transformation that we'll get into here shortly with what we see with Moses after his encounter with the divine, with God himself. And we see that also with Christ in the transfiguration. I said before that the transfiguration is the same word, the same Greek word used for transfiguration, the same word that Paul uses when he's speaking about being transformed. It's the exact same Greek word, and how we should be transformed ourselves. But one of the things that really transformed us is going off into the unknown. That doesn't necessarily mean physically, so to speak, but it also means intellectually and even physically, pushing ourselves. And encountering resistance in our life. And we do that physically. It transforms us physically, and we see that. That's pretty self-evident. But even intellectually, as we challenge ourselves with material that's very difficult to understand and read, and to go not only difficult to read and understand, but also to challenge ourselves with our own ideas, our own interpretations that we have built within our current model and our left, as I spoke about before, this house in our left hemisphere, to go ahead and reconstruct that by grafting in new information that could transform that and transform our perception of reality as such. And the more we encounter by taking ourselves from the known into the unknown, that's essentially what Abraham encountered himself. He ventured from the known into the unknown. And what's fascinating is the ideas of transformation are even embedded within that story. He went, Abraham and Sarah both went out of there childless and went into the unknown and, had children, had Isaac, and then the promised child at a very late age. And then at the same time, their names were transformed. Abram went to Abraham and Sarai went to Sarah, which is an indication. It's representing the ideas of transformation of itself, that you're no longer the same person you once were. And if you are, then you have problems. You're not really truly living a life in the spirit, because you should be going into the unknown. You should be encountering things that are unfamiliar, and you should be experiencing resistance of some sort. Obviously not too much that it kills you, but just enough that it kills a part of you. That way a new part of you can actually grow and become something new. And that's the idea, is what Christ talks about in John 15 with the pruning that I was talking about last week, is letting things go in order to bear new fruit, encounter new things that kill a part of you that can ultimately grow new parts of you that can transform you and bear more fruit at the end of the day. And that's the essence of Christianity to a certain extent, besides that of believing in Christ himself. But the byproduct of that is the fruit that is bared through us, through the transformative process, faith and works working together in the spirit. And so when nothing's changing, and we're so unbelievably comfortable here, especially in America, it's ridiculous. And I put a post this past week about the ideas of how comfortable we've gotten. When you see just on the physical end of things, when you see the general population of America being at 80%, 80% of the population is overweight, we have a major problem. I mean, you have children all over the world starving to death, and we're over here 80% of the adult population is overweight. We're becoming lazy, and if you look at it from the standpoint of Lucifer and the Antichrist and the elites controlling the world and things of that nature, you'd have to say that's essentially what they want for you. They want you to grow fat and happy, to sit there and be complacent, and to watch your shows and never engage in anything that makes you uncomfortable. I tell people all the time, again, in conversations with people, regardless of what side of this political spectrum they be on, whether it's left or right, and you can say something that will ultimately offend them. Oftentimes it's the same thing, just in a different, being said in a different manner, or being perceived in a different manner. And it's like you guys are warning each other to a certain extent, and you essentially almost believe the same things, and you're not even realizing it. You're both getting offended because it makes you uncomfortable. It's like, well, sometimes you have to be uncomfortable in order to grow. I say it all the time. I mean, if you're going to work out and lose weight, you're going to be uncomfortable most of the time. There's this one lady that I knew that had health problems, quote unquote, and most of her health problems were self-inflicted. And I suggested a few things about eating organic foods, eating some greens, eating, adding some turmeric, different things of that nature, some 86% dark chocolate for helping lower blood pressure, things, just good generalized information and suggestions. And everything that I said, it's like, oh, I don't eat organic. Oh, I don't like dark chocolate. Oh, I don't like, spinach, whole leaf spinach. And it's like, yeah, well, I don't like a lot of these things either. But which one would you rather do? Would you rather sit there and take care of yourself and eat those things that are actually beneficial for your entire body, your brain, all the way down to your feet? Or would you rather sit there and, end up taking pills your whole life? And, but some people want to be sick. They don't want to branch out to be uncomfortable, and they're okay with essentially living off pills. And I'm not trying to be too derogatory or here by no stretch of the imagination, but at the same time, it's something to consider that you have to do things that are going to make you uncomfortable, but it's transformative at the end of the day, and it makes us progress forward into enlighten us, I would say. And that's the story of Christianity in and of itself. Apart from the central theme of Christ being our Lord and Savior, people oftentimes overlook a lot of the transformative notions embedded within the New Testament, even the Old Testament itself, but especially within the New Testament. They overlook that oftentimes. And so you have to be willing to stretch beyond your bounds, stretch beyond your current model of understanding, and make yourself uncomfortable, digest the information that makes you uncomfortable, and see how it rewires your brain, reshapes your perception at the end of the day. And we now, with our modern day technology, we are understanding that more and more, that it literally transforms your entire body from your brain and inside your body with activating dormant genes that produce new proteins that make up your body. So there's so many benefits to it. It's ridiculous. And they were given that information a long time ago, saying, listen, you're going to make yourself uncomfortable and put yourself out there, going out into the world, making disciples and encountering the opposition and hearing their arguments, and then trying to make and not being defeated by those arguments, but rather taking that information that they give you and taking that and dissecting it and seeing how it fits within not only your current model of understanding of Scripture, but within Scripture as a whole itself, and on multiple different levels of analysis, and to make you that much stronger at the end of the day. That's the difference even in sports. Whenever you see the top athletes, you see the champions at the end of the day, they're the ones that generally are the ones that learn. Oftentimes you get highly talented people that, go on and just dominate the sport, but sometimes you don't get that. Oftentimes you don't get that. You'll get people that they worked hard and they're constantly, when they lose, they're watching and they're understanding, well, how did I lose? How can I improve on that and do better next time and come out on top? That's the same thing in our walk with God. We should be constantly seeking we're competing against ourselves, our older, former selves, each passing day. How can I be better than the day before? And people are beacons of light, of information that present themselves, that give us information, and we learn from them, extract those information, and piece ourselves together as we go along. And it's that's living in the walking in the Spirit daily and being transformed. That's the true essence of transformation. But okay, so into the unknown. So here we are, Joseph and Imhotep. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years of when Joseph was in prison, that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. And then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine looking and fat cows. So Pharaoh awake. He slept and dreamed a second time, and suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke. Indeed, it was a dream. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men, and Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was no one who can interpret them for Pharaoh. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh that what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 thin and ugly cows, which came up after them, are 7 years, and 7 empty heads blinded by the east wind are 7 years of famine. So it's a little difficult seeing it on a little bitty screen like that, trying to read. It didn't come out and put a few too many verses on there, unfortunately. It's very fascinating with the idea of the dreams, because we still don't even properly understand what dreams are. We dream all kinds of crazy stuff, and where does that come from? You'd have to say that if it is tied into the subatomic realm to begin with. Dreams are neurological processes and things of that nature, and in relation to science as well as scripture, higher dimensional realm, perhaps, where that information is being funneled through into our dreams. And some people dream very vivid. Well, I know I dream pretty vivid dreams, but it's generally more personalized to a certain extent. But other people dream almost mythological type dreams and have these visions that play themselves out. Carl Jung was, and they call them archetypal dreams, but Jungian dreams as well is what they call them. And of course, Carl Jung was very big into the idea of dreams and what they mean and the stories that they're telling us. And he believed they derive from the collective unconscious of humanity itself, but maybe some of them do, but then some of them also come from somewhere else that we don't exactly know what that is, just like we don't understand what consciousness is exactly. But dreams can be very informative if you really pay attention to them. Some people just pass dreams off. It's like it's good to reflect on the dream, because there may be information there. Either yourself is telling you, or perhaps the collective unconscious to a certain extent, but even the divine, the spirit of God may be speaking to you. You don't know exactly. So it's good to pay attention to what your dreams are telling you if you do have a dream. And what's even more interesting is that highly creative people have more vivid type dreams and can remember dreams. It's very fascinating when I have talks with people that cannot remember dreams, that don't have dreams. That is pretty wild. And so, but you can, as far as I can tell, you can improve that by seeking to try to remember dreams when you do have them. And the more you do that, the more you tap into your creative potential, and it'll start becoming a habit, and you'll actually begin to dream more. It'll actually increase that creative potential within your dream nature. So Imhotep, this is a very interesting character. He was a counselor to Pharaoh, in the Old Kingdom. Of course, they weren't called pharaohs in the Old Kingdom. That was the New Kingdom rendition. But they were called kings at that point. But he was pretty much second in command to Pharaoh, mimicking the story of Joseph. This right here, he was also he is supposedly responsible for the construction of step pyramids that were very prominent in the Old Kingdom of Egypt. The Old Kingdom of Egypt spanned from a time, I think I might have put that. Yes, I do. Okay. We'll go back to that here in a second. But the Old Kingdom of Egypt, when did it happen? And this is some of the artwork from the Old Kingdom of Egypt. That's when the vast majority of pyramids were actually built, were during the Old Kingdom. Now, they state that they believe that in the King Khufu, which was around 2500 BC, is responsible for building the Sphinx and building the Great Pyramids. But geological evidence, as we went over last week, in regards to the Sphinx, tells a completely different story, that he actually built on top of that. But he had, the only evidence they have to suggest that is a little statue monument that's placed, I believe it's in front of the Sphinx. It may be in front of the Great Pyramid. I think it's in front of the Sphinx. That says that they give the responsibility over to Khufu as the builder, architect of the Great Pyramid of Giza and the Sphinx. But the geological wear and tear on the Sphinx says that it dates to 10,000 BC, as we went over last week, even earlier than that. And some hypothesize the same thing with the pyramids of Giza, because their alignments that are supposedly perfectly aligned with that of Orion's belt, they mimic Orion's belt, the Great Pyramids of Giza, the 3 pyramids there. Well, the time that they were actually ideally aligned with Orion's belt in the constellation there was over 10,000 years ago. And we see megalithic structures being built. Göbekli Tepe, the pyramid and underwater pyramid of Japan, and several others, many others that I didn't even list on the deal, as well as that of Peru, and the giant stones that just defy the current technology and understanding of small tribes of hunters and gatherers at that time, especially with Göbekli Tepe. And I was actually watching a documentary this past week about how Göbekli Tepe, they're finding even more evidence that whole region spans more than 125 miles in total length of area that could be covered by Göbekli Tepe and 12 other sites that are just like it. Koran Tepe, which actually I put on there last week, with the head protruding forth, the face out of the rock. And they have all the same pillars, just like Göbekli Tepe. And the 12 total sites. And so far, what they've found is that they've uncovered about 1% of that entire almost civilization that was flourishing over 10,000 years ago, lifting blocks, the pillars, setting pillars in place that were over 20 ton. And how they gave the estimate of how it would take 50 workers. And remember, these are small tribes of hunters and gatherers at the time, 50 workers to move one pillar in place an entire week. It would take them an entire week to move that pillar in place. So, and you're talking hundreds upon hundreds of pillars. How is that possible? And did they even have 50 capable men, nomadic tribes of hunters and gatherers at that time? So something else is going on. And that's the story, what we were looking at in Genesis 6, of the sons of God coming down, mating with the women, the Nephilim, born the Nephilim, and whatever else was going on at the time was truly miraculous. And the Sumerians tell the same story as we saw with that of the Anunnaki. So there's something divine definitely going on, that they were able to move these massive stones and pillars in places and stuff. And I think there was even some reference in ancient literature, if I'm not mistaken, of doing it through the process of telekinesis. And so being able to move things with your mind, which even Christ himself speaks of after being transfigured, as we'll see later on, even referenced as well in here. But anyway, so we had the Old Kingdom. The Old Kingdom happened from right around 2600 BC to about 2200 BC. And then there was a sudden collapse. And there's actually a papyrus we'll be looking at that dates to about 1900 BC that tells what happened during the collapse of the Old Kingdom, going into what's called the intermediate period of Egypt, before the middle, right there, the Middle Kingdom begins in 2050, and then you have the New Kingdom and stuff, and that's more or less what people are familiar with, stretching from 2000, 1000 BC. So anyway, okay. So Imhotep was second in command. What you see right there, that was called stela, the hieroglyphs that are embedded within the rock, tells of a story. Now it dates to 250 BC, so it's much later edition, but it does tell the story of Imhotep, and that Imhotep was responsible for interpreting a dream and handling that of a 7 years of famine that occurred around 2700 to 2600 BC. So right at the beginning of the Old Kingdom of Egypt, this figure rose to prominence and handled that of the 7 years of famine. And he consulted with the gods, and they helped him do it. It's the same parallel story of that of Joseph, but it dates about 1,000 years prior to the traditional dating of what we place Joseph at. placed Joseph around 1700 BC, when really he's about 2700 BC. So much earlier, making the stories, again, that much more significant and authentic in and of themselves. So very fascinating things were going on. They call, the golden era of Egypt is actually during the Old Kingdom of Egypt. Most of what you see in the films and stuff, oftentimes are portraying the New Kingdom of Egypt. That's from around 2000 to 1000 BC era. But most of the pyramidal construction, things of that nature, took place during the Old Kingdom. It was a flourishing society at that time, which makes sense if there were a wealth of Hebrew slaves there. Now, what's fascinating is what scholars have found is that it states that the pyramids were built by hired servants, and they were paid with beer, interestingly enough. But that does not denote that there were several slaves during that time, and they couldn't even afford to hire enough hired servants to that be the sole force constructing the pyramids at that time. And many scholars acknowledge that there were slaves that were helping those hired servants, and the vast majority of the work was more than likely done by slaves at that time, and with more of a minute contribution by hired servants are being paid with beer and I think something else. Maybe it's wheat or something of that sort at that particular time, and they were Egyptians. And what's fascinating too is we're not sure exactly the full extent to the slavery of the Hebrews at the time in Egypt. We know that the latter end, whenever Moses comes in, was probably the most fierce type of slavery. At the beginning part, it was actually more of a collaboration going on between the Hebrews and Egyptians. It was later on, towards the time of the Exodus itself, that they really became into hard bondage. And so it's going to get interesting as we go along here. Yeah, and so Imhotep is an Egyptian name, of course. And as we see here, whenever Joseph does become elevated in his status in Egyptian society, he's given an Egyptian name. Now, in this is the name Zephnath Phania or something of that sort. But either way, he's given an Egyptian name, which would make sense that perhaps Joseph Imhotep is his Egyptian name. So there's also not as much known about him other than those certain references, the famous Selah and some other things. He was actually later on deified as well in the New Kingdom of Egypt and later. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the spirit of is the spirit of God?" And the Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you." Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." And the Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. And he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried out before him, "Bow the knee." So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zephnath Paneah, I guess is how you say that. And he gave him as wife Asenath, the daughter of Pontiparoth, priest of On. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. So we're seeing here his elevation of status in Egyptian society. And of course, we know the story that his brothers came in, and then eventually his father, and then they all came over and began to dwell in the land of Egypt. And so now we go into Exodus. I didn't mean to put so many verses in here, but there's a lot of information to be covered, and it was already quite a few slides. I was trying to compact it as much as possible. Now these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. Each man and his household came with Jacob: Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All those who were descendants of Jacob were 70 persons, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, all his brothers, and all that generation. But the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, "Look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and go up out of Egypt, go up out of the land." Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Python and Ramses. But the more they inflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, and mortar and brick and all manner of service in the field. All their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. So this is the beginning of the increase of the hard bondage of slavery compared to the easier servitude that they had with the previous Pharaoh, or maybe previous pharaohs. We're not sure exactly when that began. It doesn't specify. We have Moses, and of course he killed one of the Egyptians and flees to the land of Midian, which most scholars believe was actually in Saudi Arabia. So it's not where he did not flee to the Sinai Peninsula, but to Saudi Arabia. And that's where he encountered the burning bush at the Mount Sinai. So this is something I really enjoy art like this. To me personally, I like the medieval simplistic type art. It's very interesting. It's interesting in one aspect because we see what tyranny of the Roman Catholic Church and the kings of that time had over the people, and that of expression. And art in and of itself is already beginning to do the same thing here today. We see that even with comedians being silenced through the political correctness culture. It's essentially the same ideas. I mean, even the art is terrible. You look at modern art. I mean, it's terrible. Well, the vast majority of it is absolutely almost reprehensible to the name of art itself, to that of creativity. And so as the culture becomes more oppressive and restrictive, it restricts the creativity, and that restricts progress at the end of the day. And we're not actually seeing proper progress. We're seeing more chaos than anything else occur. So, okay, this is a lot different. It's looking a lot smaller compared to other deals. So bear with me here. There's a lot of information packed in. I am who I am. Now Moses was tending the flock to Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock back to the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Moses said, "I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn." So when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, "Moses, Moses." And he said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said, "I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. So I've come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from the land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites and Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and Jebusites, and all the megabytes and everything else that go along with it. Now, therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come now, therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? So he said, I will certainly be with you. You shall serve God on this mountain. And Moses, he said, certainly I'll be with you, and this shall be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain in the land of Midian in Saudi Arabia. And then Moses said to God, indeed, when I come to the children of Israel, say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Moreover, God said to Moses, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial to all generations. So, a lot of words there. So, Yahweh, Jehovah, depending on how you pronounce it, it's the true name of God. Understand that what other people say, they're like, oh, the 99 names of God. There's no such thing. Those are titles. Those are not names. That's different. Donai is a title. It's master. And so, those are all titles. This is the true name of God. And the true pronunciation has been lost because there's no vowels. And so we have to understand the true name of God here, Yahweh, Jehovah. Those are the best pronunciations that they can come up with. And here's the Hebrew. This is really the Hebrew of I am who I am right here. And then this is Jehovah itself, which is Lord in the Bible, over in the Old Testament, over and over. So this is to become, come to pass, exist. And this is who or which, depends on how you translate it. It's very interesting. I am who I am, or I am to become. There's several different translations I've seen. That which I become, or the becoming one. And it's interesting too, because the fabric of reality acts exactly like that. That's what's so fascinating. As we discovered, as I was stated before in previous lectures, the idea of the underlying fabric of reality, that on the subatomic realm, literally becomes, as we move and interact with it and communicate with it, it becomes existence. It becomes reality. Otherwise it's just sheer potential. It's a wave, in the wave nature. It's activated into actuality, into particle state of what we see and touch and interact with on a daily basis, only through our conscious observation, and that of a communication and dialogue with those particles themselves. Very fascinating. And essentially it's kind of stating that not that God is the universe. That's not what it's stating. And that's kind of the Buddhist idea, that the universe is God. But it's more of a I would say it's more of a emergence manifestation from branch of that of the heavenly realm, the higher dimensional realm, which more or less is a part of God, because all things are contained within him. So you could say the universe it's not God himself, but it is a part of God, and he manifests himself through that reality, which that may be how he spoke with the prophets, as I was saying earlier, through dreams and even through our consciousness. And what we're figuring out with consciousness is that maybe through that of quantum processes. So the very essence of reality is interactive particles. As they interact, are producing consciousness in our brains, and perhaps through that interaction, God is able to speak through those particles. We don't understand the complexity. What's interesting too is the very fact that consciousness, as I said before, is found within the image of the beast, the breath of life, pneuma in Greek, which is the Antichrist gives to the image of the beast, gives them consciousness, gives the new AI system full consciousness. And I said before that perhaps, as far as we can tell, maybe if quantum processes are that which give rise to consciousness, then the new quantum processing of quantum computers could very well be that which gives rise to a fully conscious AI system. And if that's the case, then that's tapping into, we don't understand what the particles are doing. We don't even know where particles come from. We know that they come in and out of existence all the time from apparently nothing. But that's not the case, as I was talking about with dark energy and dark matter. There's something that is literally a part of our universe that we cannot detect. And we're not sure what it is, but we think maybe it's higher dimensional realm. Perhaps it's one theory. Hypothesis is that it's a higher dimensional realm interacting with our own. And, in the Bible, it talks about the heavenly realm, and perhaps that's where existence, the particles are coming in and out of the higher dimensional realm, the heavenly realm, all the time, interacting with us and interacting with reality and such. And so, as I said before, it's very complex, and I'm doing my best throughout, or have done my best and doing my best, trying to figure and understand all of this within the whole confines of the context itself, whatever that means exactly. Context, you could say, well, the context of the Bible, well, no, it's even broader than that. Context of science, no, it's even broader than that. The context of existence, broader than that. Perhaps it's the higher dimensional realm, and goes on and on. We don't know how many layers of analysis are actually there to contend with. And so that's why it is very complicating. And so when people are so sure and they speak as though they're so sure about how things work, it's like, no, you're already wrong. Even if you are right to a certain extent, because it's like, well, no, you're right in that one little sliver, but then you just miss all the other details or over, it's the same thing you see within the Bible. You take verses, there's just so many layers of analysis that have to be, that have to go together. We even see that on the subatomic level of reality with quantum entanglement. All the particles are entangled. I was saying before, I think I was saying on the show, man, I talk about so many things. I'm trying to make sure of what I'm exactly talking about sometimes. If I haven't, I know I'm repeating myself sometimes, but anyway, that everything affects each other. And we're constantly, because even the particles that we affect in our own existence in and of itself have a ripple effect throughout the fabric of space-time in the whole of the universe. Literally, you affect a particle here that's entangled with another particle that's 13.5 billion light years away from us. They affect each other simultaneously. There is no deviation of time, no discrepancy of time at all in the travel of information, which Albert Einstein called spooky action at a distance, I believe is what he called it, because it didn't make any sense. Information traveling faster than the speed of light, but they do that. And so we're made up of particles. Existence and things that we're interacting of are made up of particles, and we're interacting with each other, interacting with reality, and we're having an effect everywhere. Everything that we do, everything we say, everything we essentially think of to a certain extent, all of that plays a large part in the overarching context of reality and existence as humans, and so on. And so it's very complex, and they even had this hypothesis called quantum retrocausality. I haven't really talked about it or thought about it in a while, but I was thinking about the ideas in Adam and Eve a few years ago on this very idea. It's quantum retrocausality is that the particles that we affect now are not only affecting future outcomes, but they're actually even affecting past outcomes. Everything is so intertangled. And I was just talking to friend Michelle with Ashley and them, and Michelle and I were talking. I was explaining the ideas of what's called block time, and it's this idea that time is the landscape that occurs all at one time, which is fascinating. And quite a few physicists believe this is actually the case on how reality works. Just as we had three-dimensional realm of space, the fourth dimension of time acts the same way, that you can move. If you have technology, you can move freely within that landscape. But there is no such thing as alterations of time, different timelines like we see in the popular films of Back to the Future. But rather, you can only move, and whatever you do has already been done, because you have already done it. Everything takes place all at the same time. Time unfolds all at one time. And the Bible echoes this. This was so fascinating. God can see time unfold all at one time. He is everywhere all the time. He can see time unfold. Well, physicists believe that that's exactly how the reality works. The only reason that we see time unfolding in the manner that we do is simply more or less related to the fact of our quantum processing to that of consciousness, as well as our biological processes in our bodies and our brains as well, of decay. And so it allows time to unfold in bits rather than unfold all at once. And so I'm telling you, it's very complex how our reality works, our universe and things. And so, essentially what that means is that we're here right now. Christ is being crucified right now. Moses is ascending Mount Sinai. Everything is taking place all at one time. So even if you did travel back in time, you wouldn't alter anything because you've already done it. That's already taken place. That's already occurred. I know most people are like, I don't understand anything you're talking about. I've had several people say that before, but I'm like, okay, just bear with me. It's like traveling through space, but you travel through time. But that doesn't, you're not affecting anything because you've already, the whole grandfather paradox where, well, what if you went back and killed your grandfather? You'd never be born. Well, you just would never be born. You never, you wouldn't have never been able to go back and do that in the first place because it's already occurred. All those things have already taken place. There's no timeline. So anyways, the very broad context going on here. It's very complex and trying to piece it all together. And so we have to be very careful in how we assess information and how we assess ideas. That's why it's very vital that we continuously update our current model of understanding. And it has to happen gradually because too much, too quick, as we were talking about in the Garden of Eden, is a shock, almost at a level of psychosis. And nothing good really comes from that. It completely dismantles your entire knowledge structure of existence and collapses you, rather than if you do it in an incremental manner by obtaining that information and then integrating bit by bit, then you'll actually be able to reconstruct your model and it won't kill you. It'll only kill parts of you, which are essential for the development of the character, development of the individual, and the transformation thereof, and to be able to go on and really make a difference. And so, anyways, yes. So we see the coming one, of course, Jehovah, Yahweh. It's the four letters over here on the right-hand side is the existing one. Very fast. I'm telling you, I always enjoyed Exodus, especially Moses being on the mountain with God and just the mysteriousness and the pillar of cloud. Like, what are these things exactly? What is the pillar of cloud? We still don't understand that. Now, I get into that here shortly, but we really do not understand that. We think we do, and we think in the terms of heavenly creatures and little naked angels on puffy clouds and things, but that's not the correct interpretation. That's not the correct perception and idea of how that works, as far as I can tell, because there's no indication of that. And as I said before, if we have the technology, advanced technology we do here, what's not to say that in the heavenly realm they have much more advanced technology that we can't even fathom. That's exactly what the New Jerusalem looks like. It's a symbol of the new earth and the universe. So what's not to say that the pillar of cloud, that's just what they interpreted it as, because they can't come up with any other word. You see the same thing with Christ in his transfiguration, a bright cloud overshadowed him. What is that? I mean, it sounds like a freaking UFO ship. I'm not saying that they're aliens in their universe. I don't get it. They're higher dimensional beings, but there's more to the story. And a cloud takes him up after his 40 days on earth after the resurrection. And it's like, wait a minute. They say a cloud because that's the only word that they can really describe for it. But I mean, for all we understand, it could literally be some higher form of technology that came from the higher dimensional realm of the heavenly realm. We don't know exactly. And to state that you know already and to say that you're adding to the word, that's not adding to the word at all. I'm not adding anything. I'm literally taking what it says and trying to understand what it's saying. Because right here, this again. Okay, so this is Yahweh is on the bottom left there, the little coin. and he's on a flying chariot. Okay, and even in Psalms it says that he flies around on cherubim, and that's essentially what that's showing. It is the same depiction as we see on the top and on the right bottom right there, except those are different. Those are actually quote unquote different deities, but I believe them to be the same. Anu, the head god, the Father in heaven, is on the bottom right there. He's flying in this winged disc. The same thing, Ahura Mazda, which is the head god of Zoroastrianism. I believe these are the same deities. They're just, well, Anu, first off, is very early development, all the way stemming back to around 3000 or so BC, as I was saying with that of Abraham and the ancient Sumerians. And so these are these are deities. They're not fictional. They're not mythological. They actually visited humanity. And what Yahweh is doing is he's the actual creator of the universe. And some of the fallen angels, I believe, have quote unquote, and even people's misunderstanding, they go on and worship. We see that in the Catholic Church. You see that even in Christianity. You see people worship the archangel. I want the spirit of the archangel Michael. It's like, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just have the spirit of God? That doesn't make any sense. Mary and all these different things. We do a lot of the same thing in Christianity if we're not careful. Well, they did the same thing in ancient Sumerian. They began with the head god of Anu, which more than likely was, as far as I can tell, could have been Yahweh and the true God. And then they began to worship other deities as well, and unfortunately, rather than worshiping the true God, they began to worship angelic beings. And so, anyway, so we have to be careful. And that's what Yahweh keeps reiterating constantly throughout the Old Testament. You serve only me, not my creation. You serve me. And so, because I am the creator, not only the creator, he's the creator, he's the sustainer, and in him, all things are contained. That means that in him, he's the very essence of reality as such, as I was just stating earlier. So you are nothing apart from him. That's what's fascinating. People are like, well, I don't need God, or, it's like, no, you're not understanding. Your very essence, the particles that make up your very essence, like you cannot detach from God. And I believe that's what the lake of fire represents at the end. It's the complete eradication of consciousness. You're completely separated forever from God. You're done. Your existence is gone. Because apart from God, you do not exist. And that's what a lot of people are not understanding. They're like, well, why would God need so much praise and worship? And well, first off, what's interesting is God never really says anything about praising him. We do, as humans, talk about praising him and worshiping him. And worship actually comes from an older English word, worthship. It's worthy of our praise and admonition and stuff and things of that nature. And he is, because he creates and sustains all things. Again, apart from him, the very essence of reality, you are nothing. You do not even exist. So why wouldn't you want to sit there and serve him and to live for him? And it's not just about serving him. Serving the byproduct of having a relationship with him. And, serving him is in so many different forms. It's ridiculous. He's serving you at the same time you're serving him. But most people don't get either. Like, oh, so he's just, we're slaves to him. It's like, no, it's a reciprocal deal here. He's keeping you alive and keeping you, from not existing anymore. And he's blessing you and opening up doors of opportunity and bringing people to you that you can connect with, and so on and so on. And blessing you with food and everything that you need. And you're at the same time, that reciprocal relationship, you're doing things for him and you're feeding off each other. And that's the way it actually works. Just like reality, the very essence of reality is we're interacting with reality. Reality is interacting with us. These particles have a dynamic relationship going back and forth as we're moving throughout existence. And so, yeah. All right. So, Puar Pyrus. I believe that's how you pronounce it. I'm not mistaken. Puar Pyrus. Papyrus. This papyrus speaks of what happened at the collapse of the old kingdom of Egypt around 2200 or so BC. Interesting thing about this is it was written sometime around 1900 BC, so a little bit after that time. And it echoes, we're about to look at this, it echoes a lot of the plagues that are listed in the book of Exodus. So it's a very fascinating work. As I said before, to me, it's evidence not only supporting the Exodus, but taking the Exodus much further back in time than its traditional dating. It's a much older story. It's much richer. It's much more authentic. It's much more original than its later traditional dating hypothesis, I would say. So here we go. And the plagues. Puar is, it says plague is throughout the land. Blood is everywhere. The river is blood. Men shrink from tasting human beings and thirst after water. That is our water. That is our happiness. What shall we do in respect thereof? All is ruined. Exodus 7:20, it says, all the waters of the river were turned to blood. There was blood throughout all the land of Egypt, and the river stank. And all the Egyptians dug around the river for water to drink, for they could not drink of the water of the river. So, to 10, forsooth, gates, columns, and walls are consumed by fire. Lower Egypt weeps. The entire palace is without its revenues. To it belong wheat and barley, geese and fish. Forsooth, grain has perished on every side. Forsooth, that has perished, which was yesterday seen, the land is left over to its weariness, like the cutting of flax. Exodus 9:23-24, and the fire ran along the ground. There was hell, and fire mingled with the hell, very grievous. And thou smote every herb of the field, and broke every tree of the field. And the flax and the barley was smitten, for the barley was in season, and flax was ripe. But the wheat and the rye were not smitten, for they were not grown up. There remained no green things in the trees or in the herbs of the fields through all the land of Egypt. It goes on, Puar 5:5, all animals their hearts weep, cattle moan. Behold, cattle are left astray, and there is none to gather them together. Exodus 9:3, the hand of the Lord is upon thy cattle which is in the field, and there shall be a very grievous sickness. Gather thy cattle and all that thou hast in the field. And he that did not fear the word of the Lord left his servants and cattle in the field. Puar 9:11, the land is without light. Exodus 10:22-23, and Moses stretched forth his hand toward heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They saw not one another, neither rose any from his place for 3 days, but all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. Puar 4:3 is that forsooth the children and princes are dashed against the walls. Forsooth the children and princes are cast out in the streets. The prison is ruined. He who places his brother in the ground is everywhere. It is groaning throughout the land, mingled with lamentations. Exodus 12:29. And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne to the firstborn of the captive that was in the prison. There was not a house there where there was not one dead. There was a great cry in Egypt. Puar 7:1, behold, the fire has mounted up on high. Its burning goes forth against the enemies of the land. Exodus 13:21, this is fascinating. By day in a pillar of cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. And then Puar 3:2, gold and lapis lazuli, silver and malachite, carnelian and bronze are fastened on the neck of female slaves. Exodus 12:35-36. And they requested from the Egyptians silver and gold articles and clothing, and God made the Egyptians favored them, and they granted their request. So we see so many parallels, and there's actually even more than that in that papyrus. And again, that dates back to about 1900 BC. And it's telling of the story of the collapse of the old kingdom going into what's called the intermediate period of Egypt around 2200 BC. And that's the only real clear indications that we know. There was literally a sudden collapse And it would make sense if there were a wealth of slaves there that exited out of Egypt, as well as the catastrophes of the plagues themselves going on at that time. The whole Egyptian society, civilization, culture collapsed at that point and had to rebuild itself back up. And it took a couple hundred years or so to be able to do that efficiently and effectively. Okay, so we're looking at Mount Sinai, and we'll get into it here shortly as well, with a few different things I'll go into. But anyway, so we have here's Egypt, and most of the again, I can't. That's right, I'm not on the split screen. So you have the Gulf of Suez, you have the Gulf of my gosh, what is that? Gulf of Aqaba. And you see the Mount Sinai, Jabal el-Lawz is what actually the name of the mountain in Saudi Arabia there. The traditional mountain of Sinai and the wandering of children are actually in the Sinai Peninsula. So the triangular formation in between the two gulfs is where the Sinai Peninsula is located at. And so that's a traditional site, an area that they roamed for 40 years. But again, most scholars believe the land of Midian is not even in there. It's actually over in Saudi Arabia. We're about to see evidence for that mountain, that region in and of itself. So here is Jabal el-Lawz and the proposed Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb, whichever one it is necessarily. But anyway, we have the water that flowed, had the rock that had water that flowed out from it, that Moses smited, whichever one you want to do, to be funny there. But anyways, smote in the book of Exodus, or in the story of Exodus, water came gushing forth. There's actually evidence of mass water gushing forth from there, all the way down on both sides. Fascinating deal, and that's over in the land of Saudi Arabia, right near this mountain. And this mountain itself is actually burnt on top. Actually black rock on top there. It's burnt, just like it says in the book of Exodus. This whole area is fenced off, and actually, as the Saudi Arabian government has fences, you can actually look on Google Maps. That's very curious. They have a documentary on this as well if you want to look at it. Very fascinating. They have a few different documentaries now. But this whole region has several different fences, has guards there, and they have signs that it's an archaeological site. And they even have, we'll see here shortly, where the altar for the golden calf is placed. And it's fascinating. You have down here is the 12 pillars of stone that represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And that's all in that location itself. That on the top left-hand corner is a little corral where they actually took animals for animal sacrifice, representing the same thing as what the children of Israel had to do. You see the etchings of the bulls and calves on right there into the bedrock. And then that fenced area, that is the altar. And there's actually, you can't probably see it that well, but there's etchings of calves on that altar, that rock platform up there. Very ancient drawings. And that whole deal is enclosed with barbed wire fence. And so, and there actually, it was, what was it, I think maybe it was a couple of years ago, Saudi Arabia actually came out stating that they wanted to increase tourism, and they wanted people to come see the Mount Sinai and see this whole region right here. And so they were trying to promote tourism, and it came out on Fox News, on a lot of mass mainstream media, that they are ramping up their tourism, trying to get more people to come over and tour Saudi Arabia, and they were referencing towards this region right here. So it's very fascinating, trying to promote Christians and things to come over and see that site, and Jews as well, and trying to get people to generate some income as well, of course. All right, this is Yeah, no, absolutely. Actually, I believe that they have been doing that. That's why Catholic Church, Sinai Peninsula, all this and that, and reading the text, you can pretty well tell that it's not in that region where the traditional region is over in land of Midian, which was Saudi Arabia, and and the Saudi Arabian government acknowledged that very quickly, and they've had this fence up for quite some time, and they knew it was an archaeological site, and that it mimics that of the stories found in Exodus. There's another interesting thing. They just discovered this stuff in Saudi Arabia, not far from that region. These are burials, hundreds of burials, laid out one after another, which almost mimics what we see as far as a wandering nation such as Israel and the deaths that it speaks of, whether at Mount Sinai or even later on, as they were wandering around in the desert, that they would bury their dead. And what's fascinating is it actually dates to approximately that same time around the collapse of Old Kingdom of Egypt. So, and what's the thing too that I want to get at here that's very fascinating to me is what each of those burials look like. You see this disc shape, and then you see some, your triangular formation, and they're not sure exactly why they buried it, like what those represent. They're not sure. But I was thinking in the technological format here, if the pillar of cloud was in fact not a cloud at all, but rather some form of technology, let's say some kind of ship, so to speak, that had lights that represented fire, quote unquote, that illuminated at night, and the cloud itself during the day was more or less just a ship by itself, but at night what they're seeing and what they're representing may be that quote unquote pillar, and that's what they were actually seeing. I don't know that for sure. I'm just stating a little hypothesis there, that if this in fact the true Mount Sinai, and these are in fact the burials of the people, why would they choose that shape? If that is truly a part of the Exodus, and you would think the pillar of cloud, what that may have been, may be exactly that. I'm not saying that's what it is. Don't hold me to it, but it's definitely something to consider at least. So, but they date to right around the same time. And even the proposed Mount Sinai, I haven't really seen any dating on it, fascinatingly. And of course, there hasn't been as much potential except here just recently to be able to do some type of excavation work to be able to date it. It's very difficult to get to sites like that, especially that are well protected by Muslim influenced government. So it's but anyways, I would imagine it's probably dated. As far as I can tell, the calves, the symbol, the way that they're drawn, represent a lot of what the old kingdom of Egypt's representations of calves and bulls look like. The newer rendition of the new kingdom of Egypt look much different, much more updated compared to its ancient counterpart that we see etched on the stones even here in the Mount Sinai region. So something to consider. I wouldn't doubt that it dates to right around the same time. And anyways, so it's something to consider with those. Okay, trying to gather my thoughts here. Encounter with the divine. Yeah, so when Moses descends from Mount Sinai, this is fascinating because this represents parallel. I'll show here in a second, parallels with that of transfiguration of Christ. And now, so when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, and the two tablets of testimony were in Moses' hand when he came down from the mountain, that Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone while he talked with him. So when Aaron and all the children of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come near him. So this illumination from an encounter with God himself. And I believe there's an interesting parallel with that of the Christian walk, I've said before, is the fact that we're supposed to be transformed and somewhat illuminated. Even in the Buddhist philosophy, you see the same thing as that of enlightenment. You become an illuminated individual, but only through the process encounter with the divine. And that can be done in many different ways, of course. And but I think taking care of ourselves physically, obviously, is a fundamental mode of in engaging with the divine, you could say. Taking care of your temple in order for the temple to function properly, for you to be able to truly engage with other contents and other environments. But as I said before, engaging with new information and that information transforming you from the inside out as you engage with it and contend with it and try to wrestle with it and understand. If you're doing that daily, and if you're doing it in a prayerful type manner, then you're essentially engaging with God and you're dialoguing with Him through that information, you could say. And He's dialoguing with you through that information. You're going back and forth, and you're doing it in your thoughts as well, and that's transforming you. But we should somewhat, I'm not saying that we're going to shine, not what I'm saying, although, yeah, that would be cool. But we are supposed to be a light to the lost world around us. We're supposed to be able to illuminate the path before people. And it's also a process of illuminating the truth to people, you could say, allowing them to be able to see the truth. And that's only accomplished as we continue to engage with God and engage with the information, deeper information that we need in order to truly illuminate the pathway for the lost. But Christ did the exact same thing in Matthew 17, where He transfigured. Because now after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, His brother, led them up on a high mountain by themselves. He was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and His clothes became as white as the light. So the parallel there. And we're supposed, as I said before, that transfiguration, that word is, the same Greek word that is used, that Paul uses in regards to the transformed Christian. Same exact word. So they just translated transfigured here, but it's transformed nonetheless. Or vice versa, become transfigured, as Paul would use. So we have to understand that we're supposed to become much more than I think what we're representing in the Christian church today. And it doesn't matter what level you're at. God, not only can God use you, because that's the thing. People are like, well, God will use you regardless of what it is. But it's not that He just uses you; He actually transforms you through that process, and even prior to the process of whatever it is that you're in, and whatever work you're supposed to engage in, to prepare you to be able to encounter the work and then transform you through it. But because there's always an initial point, just like God accepts us for who we are as we come. But then that's not where you stay. You continuously are transformed into who He wants you to become, the greater, higher self, to ultimately bear more fruit, pruning away. And so, and what's fascinating too is the fact that, as we saw earlier with Moses speaking with the burning bush, with God, he states that, why me? So he's coming at it with a humble manner. I like that, but it's like, why me exactly? And a lot of people do that all the time. We're like, well, why me? Why would you even want to use me? Not only a reprehensible creature that I am, but also I'm so inefficient. It's unbelievable. Not as smart as some people. I'm not as, good looking as some people. I'm not as, I can't utilize my words as well as some people. All these different variables. It's like, well, yeah, no, you're essentially worthless. And Moses kind of acknowledges that in a humble form. He's like, I can't even speak well. No good. Why in the heck would you want to use me? And I'm a fugitive. I ran away. I'm a murderer. And I ran away, and here I am in the wilderness. Why in the heck would you possibly want to use me? And then he becomes one of the greatest known prophets of all time, and literally almost essentially face to face with God Himself. It's it's good to have a humble attitude whenever we do approach God. and approach any type of new information as we're, going along our journey of living and walking in the Spirit and dialoguing with God through as we encounter new information, new experiences, that have a humble right hemisphere perspective of not imposing our will and imposing our knowledge structure and model onto things, but rather taking information as it is, as it comes to us, and then trying to integrate that in. It's good to do that, and even Christ says that himself, to humble yourself and become like little children, to be able to soak information up and truly be transformed at the end of the day. Otherwise, it's just like hitting your head up against a brick wall. You're not going to get anywhere very fast because that knowledge structure is too compacted, that model that you have construed in your head. But you come into it in a humble manner. You're apt to be able to digest information in a much richer form, and then God makes us ready. I'm sure Moses himself, as he progressed, I think that shows it a little bit, that there's progression with Moses. He goes from the state of humble shepherd, not being able to speak well, to this mighty judge, illuminated mighty judge that descends from the mountain with the law in his hand. And that's the representation of the Christian life, essentially. Christ himself, as he descends from the mountain, has been transfigured and he's illuminated. And we're supposed to represent that same thing. We're supposed to continuously grow and adapt. We're not supposed to stay in the milk of the word, but progress into the meat and to get deeper and deeper as we go along in our relationship with God. As we live and walk in the Spirit, we encounter the divine, we start becoming quote unquote judges, but not judges in the sense of obviously tyrannical type judges. That's not what I'm implying. But teachers. That's essentially what Moses represented as well. He was the teacher. He was the giver of the law, but a teacher. You're giving the information at hand. It's not something he came up with, but rather was given to him to give to the people and to explain. And he ultimately went on to appoint other judges in his place, because he was one person he could handle. So he taught and had essentially disciples, the same thing as Christ, and that went on to help judge as well as the enterprise grows itself, as God blesses you, enriches you, and so. But we should be progressing and becoming in the higher forms of ourselves, and everyone should be doing that to a greater or lesser degree, depending on what your calling is. But you'll never know until you pursue it, and you continuously grow and challenge yourself in a humble manner. Otherwise, you're never going to grow. You're just going to read the same things and engage with the same content and remain exactly the same and plateau. And so you're never going to actually progress beyond that. In the bank, why use me? He even thinned down the army until they saw it was not by their mind. No, absolutely, Joe. Thank you for mentioning that with Gideon. Why use me? And then, there's this small little tribe of warriors that defeated the army, knowing that it was surely God working through them. And it doesn't take a multitude necessarily. It just takes the power of God working in through a few that can make such a great difference. And that's the way we're supposed to be as Christians themselves, knowing that God, it doesn't take a mighty individual, the most intelligent, the best looking, the most athletic, or any of that sort, but just a humbled individual that's willing to be used by God and to bear the cross, to take up the challenge of engaging. And you think about that too with the ideas of the cross, bearing your cross. What does that mean exactly? The cross represents that of suffering. When you engage with new experiences, engage with new material, hard, difficult to understand material, you're engaging in a type of suffering, and it's transforming you literally. And so that's what we're supposed to pursue each and every day of life. And of course, there's times for rest, of course. Even God put that in the law itself, to rest one day and to recover. You see that even with any type of athlete. I know for myself, even with racing and stuff, you train hard, but then you also recover hard. That way your body can recover properly and it grows stronger. Otherwise, you're just wearing yourself down and not getting anywhere. So there's that balance, again, as I was talking about before, between chaos and order. There's a balance between all that. The order part being the disciplinary part of hitting the books, exercising and doing things you need to do, engaging with other people, putting yourself in a new environment, but at the same time, taking time to back away and to meditate and to be one with God and to really engage with Him in a quiet manner and being one with nature, so to speak, and to really rest and be able to recover. That way you can go on to do even greater works. It's interesting too, because I do it myself. Like, you engage with something difficult text, and you'll be reading on it, and then you take a break for a while and you think about it, and then you kind of go do some other things. Then you come back to it. It integrates itself much more efficiently compared to just constantly hitting hard all the time. I noticed that too, even doing college courses. You're hitting the books and stuff hard all the time and doing all this different work. I end up forgetting a lot of the different material later on, rather than actually qualitative type studying, really engaging with content, taking my time and allowing that knowledge to soak through. It stays in there much longer compared to hustling and bustling through all that. That's when Christians are like, oh yeah, we're gonna hustle for God and stuff. It's like, well, did God tell you to do that? How do you know that exactly? And maybe sometimes you need to take your time and allow God to really work through you. It took Moses 80 years for God to really, he was working through him for 80 years to prepare him for what he was going to be called, and then another 40 years of work, to be done. And he was transforming him all the way until his death, if you really think about it. And so, very fascinating. The law. So, and we're just going to touch on these right quick. I'm not going to go in depth here because we're already at an hour and 45 minutes. I do appreciate everyone staying on, by the way. I really do appreciate it, that's for sure. So, we have the law. That do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For surely I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled. Whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5:17 through 20. The law is very fascinating. There's, again, as I was saying in the first deal, if you want to understand Old Testament law, highly recommend Is God a Moral Monster? The book is in the link with Paul Copan, and I also have an interview with him on the YouTube channel that you can go to. I was going to put it in the link in the description, but I completely forgot, unfortunately. But yes, I have his book. The link is in the description of this video. You can check that out. Great work. I read it a couple of times. It's just very fascinating, dealing with a lot of difficult passages of the Old Testament, as well as the difficult passages of dealing with the eradication of the Canaanites, which I was going to kind of get into, but we don't really have enough time. I'm probably going to touch it. We speak about it. Him and I talk about it on the interview, but also next week, I think, as we go into the birth of Christ, we're going to touch in on some Old Testament evidence and a little bit of the Canaanites and stuff as well, and the judges, to do my best with all that as we go through this. And I'll do that here in a second. I'll talk about my plans for the future as because we're actually, today is halfway through this series, and it's really an overview series as I go through. And then once I'm done with the series, I was going to go ahead and start delving into more specifics and kind of do a series on, 4 or 5 lecture type series on the creation and Adam and Eve, and literally go into intricate detail of different things, more so than what I could on the show, because I only have a certain amount of time. If I can do that, I can break it down even further. But I'm still trying to figure all that out exactly how I'm going to do that. I'm still praying on it and stuff. And so, but the law itself, does it still apply to us today? It's like, well, the commandments, the overview of I would say, generalized commandments that are referenced in the New Testament reiterate what would more or less be important. And there's a lot of importance embedded within the law itself that we can derive from. Now, some of the cultural practices, maybe not so much, although there's some utility in it to a certain extent, just to say the least, that keeps society organized. That could keep the church organized to a certain extent. Not every single thing, because you have to understand the law was written for a particular time. Paul Copan talks about that, as even in that quote I was talking about with N.T. Wright, that the law was written for a specific time. According to my estimates, around a little over 4,200 years ago. And so when you factor that in, that's a long time ago, completely different cultures, completely different lives, completely different, even people to a certain extent, that look and aged even differently than us, that knew differently than us and everything. And so even we're surrounded by different civilizations, survive differently from us. So there's a lot of other variables at play. As for a specific time, it wasn't necessarily, quote unquote, entirely ideal. It was pointing towards the ideal that was found in Christ and living and walking in the Spirit. And that's why Christ himself was talking about how you'll worship in spirit, and where 2 and 3 are gathered together in my name, that makes the church. You'll no longer need the temples and things of that nature. And he was the ultimate sacrifice. What's interesting too is how the Jews don't even, to a certain degree, even Orthodox Jews do not follow the law to the T anymore. They can't. You can't afford to. They don't even have the temple. They haven't had the temple since 70 AD, which is about approximately 40 years after the death of Christ. After the ultimate sacrifice, that is Christ himself, then the temple was completely destroyed by the Romans. And so they're not even able to follow it accordingly. They have like Yom Kippur and things of that nature are days of reflection now, rather than days of sacrifice. And you weigh your good and bad deeds and things of that nature, which are not what the law was intended to do at all. That's not what it was predicated upon. So they're not even able to follow the law accordingly anymore, not in the manner that they once were. And so Christ came to fulfill it. And after his death and resurrection, it ushered in a new era where the law, I would say, to a certain, the commandments of God live through us as we live and walk in the Spirit. Because we had the full immersion of the Spirit itself. We're supposed to be immersed with God and become one with him, and to live and walk. And that's not to say that we're going to be perfect. I was saying before, what constitutes perfect? I think I talked about on my show, where I was talking with someone the other day. It's really fascinating thinking. I was talking about block time, being able to know time in its completeness, in its entirety, and to know all of it. Perfection essentially means completeness. And, God is complete. He knows all things. He can be everywhere at all times. He's all things. And so he is complete. He has all the knowledge. One of the things that causes us to sin too is not just our nature. That's what people don't understand. They're like, oh, well, it's just, it's sinful nature. It's like, well, no, it's also because you do not have enough knowledge of future event in order to know exactly not to make a mistake, because sin is essentially making a mistake. Now, there can be more deliberate sins, of course. But oftentimes we make mistakes. And the reason being is because we do not have enough foreknowledge of the future in order to know what's going to happen. And so we're limited in our knowledge of future events and the whole of the context, and able to make complete decisions oftentimes. That's why we need the sacrifice of Christ. That's one part of it. That's not the whole part of it. Just one part of, as you think about it. And so it's essential and that's why it's so essential living and walking in the Spirit in an adaptable manner. You're walking and dialoguing with God, and he's constantly correcting us through our conscience and even I would say even to a certain degree, even updating that, because we don't even know exactly what the conscious is entirely. We think, oh, maybe it's Holy Spirit. We don't know. We don't know. This just we're too primitive in our understanding to know exactly all the ins and outs of how it works, but we can do our best to try to understand it in that fashion. But anyway, so yeah, but now of course a lot of people are like, well, that doesn't make any sense because the law is supposed to be forever. So, and the commandments are forever. But a lot of Jews and different people are like, well, no, you're not understanding. The law is forever. It states that we're supposed to, the law and the ordinances, the statutes, which he wrote for you, you shall be careful to observe forever. You shall not fear other gods. 2 Kings 17:37 time and time again, forever. What's fascinating, the word forever being used there is yom, which is the word day. So whenever you look at that, for the people that believe that yom always means literal day, as some of these scholars have said, you have to make sure what you're stating there, because then we could say this should be better translated in their literal interpretation. You shall be careful to observe day. And it doesn't make any sense now, does it? So, but that word also, what's interesting too, because it's oftentimes never translated forever. It's translated continuously or for a very long period of time, an age, as I was saying before, in reference to translating that word yom in Genesis 1, meaning age, meaning an extended period of time that that constituted millions and billions of years of evolution. Intentional evolution. I'm going to go into that here later on. It was a fascinating thing that popped up with how defining life. What is life exactly? What does that mean? And life always has intentionality behind it. So there's just so many things that are popping up now that are kind of defying the materialistic view of the universe, an atheistic, nihilistic view. It's ridiculous. I mean, there's so much support for an intelligent design, intelligence embedded. That's the same thing I was getting at with evolution. I believe evolution to be true, but I believe it to be true in an intelligent fashion, embedded within the very fabric of reality itself, that God had put in there, a program, so to speak, that allowed for this stuff to evolve the way it did. It's not just random mutations. This is intentional, directed adaptations that are going on that are so sophisticated system that we're observing here. Too sophisticated to just push it over to the side and say, yeah, I know this came from nothing, and there's nothing divine or intelligent about the universe. It's like, well, you're already unintelligent for stating such a thing. Not to be derogatory, but anyway. So observed for a very long time, and then the coming of Christ came, and He fulfilled that, and now we live in a completely different age of spiritual age, I would say, of living and walking forever with Him in the Spirit. Man, I didn't realize that. I pushed it over. So we're coming to a close here. Jericho, again, another piece of evidence for an earlier dating system of the time of the Exodus. 2100 BC was around the last time Jericho actually had true, full-fledged walls, standing walls, fortified walls to protect their city. After that, Jericho was demolished at that time. And one of the archaeologists that really studied that area stated that, and they were not related biblically at all. They were actually, I believe they're atheistic, if I'm not mistaken. They said that the walls fell via an earthquake, and the city was actually destroyed, and then was rebuilt at a later time around 1900 BC, I believe, or maybe 1700 BC. It was rebuilt several different times later, but was never really rebuilt with standing walls, giant walls that are referenced in the book of Joshua. And so the last time was around 2100 BC, which is shortly after the period of when the Exodus would occur, at the end of and collapse of the old kingdom of Egypt. And you have the walls of Jericho falling shortly after that, whenever they come marched around the deal, quote unquote, earthquake took down the walls, as it says exactly in the Bible itself, but at a very much earlier date. So again, making these stories very, very original, very interesting. Okay, let me see. Okay, this is the last one. God favors Hebrews, Jews. I just wanted to touch in this real quick because I had this question asked before about God blessing the Jews and how the Jews are the rulers of humanity and all these different things. But how much truth is there in that? And God favors the Jews as he show partiality of some sort toward Jewish people. So, well, no, that's not exactly the case. He loves all people. It says, let people serve thee and nations bow down to thee, be Lord over thy brethren, Genesis 27:29. For thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God, the Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself above all people that are upon the face of the earth. Deuteronomy 7:6. And it says in Genesis 26:4, and I will make your descendants multiply as the stars of heaven. I will give to your descendants all these lands. In your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. But there's something special about Abraham specifically, and that through Abraham, all nations shall be blessed. And so this has nothing to do necessarily with people other than through the obedience of Abraham and the sacrifice and the potential sacrifice of his son, Isaac. And through them, the earth shall be blessed. Now, whenever referencing certain things about, the Gentile nations, like it's referencing towards those that do not believe. It's not an ethnic-centric idea. It is something that is more predicated upon the worship. It's a religious context, the worship of Yahweh. What's fascinating, what people don't realize, even in Deuteronomy 7:6, there, they are holy people unto the Lord. He's speaking to the mixed multitude that are found, that are there at that time that exited out of Egypt. When they came out of Egypt, they're a mixed multitude, various different ethnic groups. Even when they came up to the walls of Jericho, oh goodness, what's her name? I always want to say Hagar. I know it's not that at all. Oh my gosh, I went blank. Oh, the prostitute, I just escaped from my mind. Maybe someone will tune in on that one. For some reason, it has just Rahab. There we go. That's what it's like. Rahab was able. Thank you, Joe. Rahab was able to be assimilated into the culture and be spared. And anyone, and Paul Cobain points this out as well, the fact that anyone that wanted to come into Israel and be a part of that culture and worship Yahweh was more than welcome to. They were able, and even as they came through, anyone that wanted to surrender, and I forgot exactly what verses it was, it said that no one surrendered except one Pacific tribe or city dwelling at that point. Anyone that wanted to surrender to the nation of Israel, and of course, a lot of the atheistic proponents that I've debated with are like, oh, well, yeah, a whole bunch of tribes, people, nomads come up and, oh, you surrender to us. Or I said, wait a minute, you're taking out of the context. First off, it wasn't just a little tribe of people. There were quite a few people. Now, I think maybe the exact numbers found within the Bible may be over-exaggerated. We don't know exactly. But either way, there were quite a few people. It wasn't just a small tribe of nomads. And on top of the fact that they had the pillar of cloud with them, the presence of God himself. That should scare you enough to say, hey, I give up, I surrender. That's it. I'm going to worship the true God. That's for sure. So, and of course, well, we don't know that's. I'm like, listen, if you're going to read the story and you're going to take it in its context, then you got to take it in the context. This is what the story says. You can't just, take it out and say, well, they see these, large tribe of nomads and, they're supposed to surrender and God punishes them. Okay. You just reference God. You have to reference the fact that God's presence was there. Anyone that saw that, I know myself seeing that, it's like, okay, apparently our gods that we are worshiping aren't doing anything to defend us. So perhaps this is the true God. We need to go ahead and surrender ourselves to him. And they were more than willing to be, taken in. And so even with that of Jericho, as they were walking around the scene, they had time to go ahead and say, hey, we surrender, we give up, 7 times. they walked around. And so it's like they have plenty of time to go ahead and surrender and assimilate themselves into the worship of the true God. And so what they were worshiping, more or less, fallen angels, let's say, or angelic beings nonetheless. So, hey, Alan, thank you for coming in. Unfortunately, coming right at the end part here, but yeah, so thank you, Joe. I really appreciate that, by the way. I meant to respond back to that. And so, but it's the same thing in the church. The church represents the same thing, but even on a broader context, outside the confines of physical borders. Now we have this open border, so to speak, of anyone that wants to come in and be a part of the richness of Christ, to be a part and worship, take part of the worship of the true God can. And so there's no restrictions there. Come as you are, and God will transform you over the course of time, and use people in your life to help transform you and to guide you in the right direction. And so there's no discrepancies there. And so it's the same thing. It's the same idea, and just on a broader scale. And so these are foreshadowings of what was to come. And through Abraham was Christ, the coming of Christ, and the Redeemer and Savior of humanity. And so through him, we are, through the Hebrews, in that manner, we are blessed. It's not that they were a righteous people. We see time and time again, God punishing, the Lord punishing the Hebrews. Throughout the book of Judges, throughout the books of Kings and Chronicles, and so on, and through the prophets themselves and the Babylonian captivity. It's, they were not wonderful, they're no different than the rest of us. It was through Abraham, through his obedience, through the faith. And then now all nations are blessed, and we're able to love each other and to work together and to have our aim at Christ, and to be a light to the lost world around us, and be a salt to the earth, a preservative. Which is fascinating too, not to get off topic here, but the ideas of light and salt. Light is a means of progress, illumination, while salt is that of preservative, of order. And so it's chaos order. And that's what we're supposed to represent. We're supposed to preserve where preservation is needed, and to illuminate where illumination is needed. And so progress and order working together. Okay, so that kind of concludes this message. I really do appreciate you guys staying on here. I know this is long studies, and I'm looking at doing some different things as we go along. Like I said, I got the new laptop. It's kind of interesting because it's definitely a lot clearer screen and everything. My laptop was very old and finally went out on me, unfortunately. Just as I was finishing up, I had enough time I could email myself the PowerPoint that I was working on that I used here this evening, and then finished it up. And I had to go get a new computer today, and all kinds of, it's very interesting. But anyway, so I really do appreciate if you guys would like to share. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. I got a few minutes left that I can answer them before my wife texts me again, tells me dinner's ready for second time. And so Daryl, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. Again, like and share. If you would like to support my work and help with this journey, you can. The links in the description. I got PayPal and Venmo. Again, you have the list of books. If you'd actually like to partner up and become a sponsor or something of that sort, of that nature, with the show, and really help take the show to the next level, and my work to the next level and stuff, feel free to reach out to me, either messenger or email or whatnot. Any and all support, even emotional support and everything, that's sort of always appreciated, of course. So again, if you guys have any questions, you're welcome to reach out. And thank you, Joe. Thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. We appreciate you guys. And thank you, Ashley. And yeah, hope you have a great week as well, Ashley, and hope everyone has a great week ahead. If you have any questions or any prayer requests, feel free to reach out to me as well. Again, I really do appreciate it. You guys have a great, safe week. enjoy the cool weather. We don't have, especially for the southern people in Texas and stuff, we don't have the 100-degree temperatures anymore. It's been phenomenal. And I actually starting to kind of feel like fall just a little bit. So, yeah, again, love to all, and have a good night. Great weekend. God bless.